Chapter 1. The Quiet Life. John Reaper Harris sat in the back of a sleek, black car as it maneuvered through the bustling streets of New York City. The vibrant energy of the metropolis was a stark contrast to the war zones he once navigated with precision and discipline. Now retired from his role as the leader of an elite federal special forces unit, John had embraced a life of tranquility and anonymity. His official record was spotless, his past missions erased from existence, leaving him a free man, or as free as a man with his past could be. As the car approached his luxurious high-rise apartment, John couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. Years of covert operations, high-stakes missions, and countless battles had finally given way to a peaceful existence. He had traded in his combat gear for tailored suits and his tactical plans for business strategies. John Harris, the feared and respected Reaper, was now a globe-trotting businessman, a cover that allowed him to blend seamlessly into society. His new life as the CEO of an international logistics firm was a stark departure from his previous existence. The company, Harris Global Logistics, operated in cities across the world, handling everything from shipping containers to private charters. John's days were filled with managing operations, closing deals, and attending high-profile meetings. To the outside world, he was a successful, yet enigmatic, entrepreneur. But in the quiet moments of the night, memories of his past life surfaced. Images of covert operations, fallen comrades, and the weight of command. As he stepped out of the car and into the grand lobby of his apartment building, John exchanged polite nods with the doorman and the receptionist. They knew him as Mr. Harris, the courteous and somewhat aloof businessman who often traveled for work. They had no inkling of his past, no idea of the battles he had fought or the enemies he had faced. John preferred it that way. The anonymity was a shield, a way to protect those he loved and himself from the ghosts of his past. Reaching his penthouse suite, John was greeted by the serene ambiance he had meticulously crafted. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a constant reminder of the world he now inhabited. The minimalist decor, characterized by sleek lines and neutral tones, was a far cry from the chaos and disorder of the battlefields. Here, he found solace in the simplicity of his new life. Despite his peaceful existence, John's past was never far behind. His home was a fortress of solitude, filled with mementos that hinted at his true identity. Hidden away were his medals, tactical gear, and a collection of weapons, remnants of the life he had left behind. He kept his skills sharp, maintaining a rigorous training regimen in his private gym, just in case. In the back of his mind, John knew that the peace he had found was fragile, and that his past, with all its ghosts, could never truly be buried. John moved to the living room, where a photo of his daughter, Emma, and granddaughter, Lily, took pride of place on the mantel. Their smiles were a source of strength for him, a reminder of why he had chosen this path of peace. Emma, a successful architect, had inherited his tenacity and drive. Lily, with her infectious laughter and boundless curiosity, was the light of his life. They were his anchor, the reason he had walked away from the violence and chaos of his former career. That evening, John prepared a simple dinner, savoring the routine of everyday life. Cooking had become a therapeutic ritual for him, a way to unwind and center himself. As he sat down to eat, he allowed himself to reflect on the tranquility he had worked so hard to achieve. The sound of the city outside was a comforting backdrop, a reminder that he was no longer in the line of fire. After dinner, John settled into his favorite armchair with a book, letting the words transport him to another world. Reading had always been a passion of his, a way to escape the harsh realities of life. Tonight's selection was a historical novel, a tale of intrigue and adventure that mirrored, in some ways, the life he had once led. As he turned the pages, he felt a sense of contentment, a rare and precious feeling that he cherished deeply. Hours later, as he prepared for bed, John's thoughts drifted back to his comrades. He missed the camaraderie, the unspoken bond that formed between soldiers who had faced death together. He wondered how they were faring, whether they had found their own versions of peace. He hoped they had, knowing all too well the scars that lingered long after the battles were over. John lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, memories flooding his mind. He thought about the missions that had defined his career, the high-profile rescues, the covert operations in hostile territories, the times when failure was not an option. Each mission had required precision, courage, and a willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice. He had led his team with unwavering resolve, earning their respect and loyalty. They had called him Reaper, a name that struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. But those days were behind him now. John had traded the adrenaline of combat for the quiet satisfaction of a job well done in the business world. He had built a new life, one that allowed him to blend into the background, to live without the constant threat of danger. Yet, even in this new existence, he remained ever vigilant. He knew that the peace he had found could be shattered in an instant, and he was prepared to protect it at all costs. The next morning, John rose early, as he always did, and went for a run in the nearby park. The crisp morning air invigorated him, and he relished the sense of freedom that came with each stride. Running had become a way for him to clear his mind, to focus on the present and let go of the past. As he navigated the winding paths, he took in the beauty of the natural world, appreciating the simple pleasures that life had to offer. After his run, John returned home and went through his morning routine. He showered, dressed in a sharp suit, and prepared for another day at Harris Global Logistics. As he sipped his coffee, he reviewed the day's agenda, meetings with clients, a conference call with his overseas partners, and a working lunch with potential investors. It was a far cry from the life he had once known, but it was fulfilling in its own way. John's phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from Emma. She wanted to arrange a family dinner soon, a chance for him to spend time with her and Lily. John smiled, his heart swelling with love for his family. They were the reason he had chosen this path, the reason he had walked away from a life of violence and embraced one of peace. Chapter 2. The Call. The tranquil life John, Reaper, Harris had painstakingly built was about to be shattered. It was a late Sunday afternoon when his phone buzzed insistently on the kitchen counter. He had just finished a run and was enjoying the quiet solitude of his penthouse. He glanced at the screen, seeing Emma's name flash urgently. A sense of foreboding washed over him as he answered. "Dad, it's Lily. She's in the hospital." Emma's voice was frantic, breaking with emotion. "She fell from the school building. They say it was an accident, but I know it wasn't. Dad, you have to come quickly." The world around John seemed to blur as he processed Emma's words. His beloved granddaughter, Lily, was fighting for her life. The peace he had cherished crumbled in an instant, replaced by a searing need for action. He grabbed his keys and rushed out the door, his mind racing with a mixture of fear and determination. The drive to the hospital was a blur. Memories of Lily's infectious laughter and bright smile played in his mind, fueling his resolve. He arrived at the hospital and sprinted towards the emergency room, his heart pounding. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils as he navigated the labyrinth of corridors. As John approached the hospital room, he heard Emma's voice, strained with anger and frustration. "Get out now. I know my daughter was pushed off the building and didn't fall on her own. Don't think those who hired you can settle this with money. I'll fight you till the very end." John burst into the room to find Emma confronting a well-dressed man who looked more concerned with his appearance than the gravity of the situation. Emma's eyes, red and swollen from crying, met John's and she rushed to his side. "Dad, this is Mr. Benson, the school's lawyer. He's trying to buy us off, saying it was an accident." John's gaze hardened as he looked at Benson. "Leave, now," he said in a tone that brooked no argument. The lawyer hesitated, but something in John's steely eyes made him think twice. He nodded curtly and exited the room. Emma collapsed into John's arms, sobbing. "Dad, I know Lily didn't just fall. She told me about the bullies. They tormented her because of who we are, because we're not like them." John held Emma tightly, his heart breaking at the sight of his granddaughter lying motionless in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beat rhythmically. Her small frame looked fragile against the white sheets, her face bruised and pale. "I'll find out who did this," John whispered, a promise and a vow. "And they will pay." As night fell, John sat by Lily's bedside, holding her tiny hand. He could still feel the warmth of her life, and he clung to that. He would protect her, no matter what it took. Emma had fallen asleep in the chair beside him, exhausted from the day's emotional toll. John's mind raced with memories of his past missions, each one requiring precision, patience, and an unwavering resolve. He had the skills to uncover the truth and bring those responsible to justice. But this was different. This was personal. The next morning, John met with the doctors. They explained Lily's condition. She was in a coma, and while they were doing everything they could, her prognosis was uncertain. The mention of the word coma hit John like a punch to the gut, but he didn't show it. He thanked the doctors and returned to Lily's room, where Emma was awake and watching her daughter with a mixture of hope and despair. "We need to talk," John said gently, guiding Emma out of the room to give them some privacy. They found a quiet corner in the hospital's waiting area. "Tell me everything you know about these bullies." Emma recounted the events leading up to the fall. Lily had mentioned the names of the bullies several times: Bradley Walker, Charlie Hastings, Ethan Cole, Madison Gray, Ryan Shaw, Sophie Grant, Jackson Blake, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross. Each name carried the weight of privilege and power, their families deeply entrenched in the upper echelons of society. "They've been making her life hell," Emma said, her voice trembling. She tried to stand up to them, but they only got worse. The school did nothing because of who their parents are. John listened, his anger mounting. He knew the type. Children who believed they were untouchable because of their parents' influence. But he also knew that everyone had a weakness, and he intended to find theirs. Leaving the hospital, John's mind was a whirlwind of plans and strategies. He started by visiting the school, under the guise of a concerned grandfather. The principal, Mr. Jenkins, was a polished man with a rehearsed smile. He expressed his sympathies but maintained that Lily's fall was an accident. "I'm afraid there's no evidence to suggest otherwise, Mr. Harris," Jenkins said, spreading his hands in a helpless gesture. John saw through the facade. "I understand," he replied calmly, "but I'll be conducting my own investigation." Jenkins paled slightly but nodded. "Of course, Mr. Harris. If there's anything we can do to assist, please let us know. John's next stop was the school's security office. He requested access to the surveillance footage from the day of the incident. The security guard, a young man named Mike, seemed hesitant but eventually relented after John's persuasive insistence. As John reviewed the footage, he saw Lily on the rooftop, cornered by the group of bullies. They were laughing, taunting her. The final moments were obscured, but it was clear enough, Lily didn't fall. She was pushed. With the evidence in hand, John knew he had to move carefully. These families had power and connections, but so did he. His past had equipped him with skills that could make him a ghost, striking fear into the hearts of those who deserved it. John started with Bradley Walker, the ringleader. Bradley's father was a senator, a man with influence and reach. But John wasn't intimidated. He followed Bradley after school, observing his routine, learning his patterns. Bradley was arrogant, careless, and easy to track. One night, John confronted Bradley in a secluded parking lot. The teenager's bravado melted away in the face of John's cold determination. "You think you're untouchable," John said, his voice low and menacing. "But you hurt my granddaughter. And for that, you'll pay." Bradley tried to bluster his way out, but John was relentless. He incapacitated Bradley, ensuring the boy would remember this encounter. "This is just the beginning," John warned. "You and your friends are going to face justice." The news of Bradley's mysterious injury spread quickly. Fear rippled through the group of bullies. They were used to being protected by their parents' wealth and influence, but this was something new, something terrifying. John continued his methodical approach, targeting each bully in turn. He gathered information, found their weaknesses, and struck with precision. Ethan Cole, the corporate heir, found his assets frozen due to an anonymous tip to the authorities. Madison Gray, the judge's daughter, was caught in a compromising situation that ruined her reputation. Each move was calculated to dismantle their sense of security. As John's campaign of retribution progressed, he knew he was walking a dangerous line. The parents of these children were powerful, and they wouldn't take these attacks lying down. They started to push back, using their influence to try and identify the person responsible for the string of incidents. One evening, as John returned home, he noticed a car parked near his building, its occupants watching him intently. He knew then that he had become a target, but he was prepared. He contacted his old comrades, men who had fought by his side and would stand with him again. Tom, Ace, McAllister was the first to respond. "We've got your back, Reaper," he said over the secure line. "Whatever you need." John detailed his plan to expose the corruption and bring those responsible for Lily's suffering to justice. It was risky, but they had faced worse. His comrades rallied to his side, providing the support and resources he needed. As the pressure mounted, John found himself facing another challenge. The police were becoming involved, and while some were genuinely seeking justice, others were in the pockets of the powerful families. John had to tread carefully, ensuring he stayed one step ahead. One night, as John sat by Lily's bedside, he spoke softly to her, even though she remained unresponsive. "I'm going to make this right, Lily. I promise you. They won't get away with what they've done." Emma entered the room, her face etched with worry. "Dad, you need to be careful. They're looking for you. I don't want to lose you too." John took her hand, his resolve unshaken. "I know what I'm doing, Emma. I won't let them hurt anyone else. They need to understand that their power doesn't make them invincible." The next day, John focused on his next target, Sophie Grant, the daughter of a tech mogul. She had been particularly cruel to Lily, using her influence to turn others against her. John hacked into her father's company, exposing financial irregularities that led to a major investigation. The fallout was swift and severe. Sophie's family found themselves embroiled in a scandal that threatened to dismantle their empire. John watched from the shadows, satisfied that justice was being served. But the more John pushed, the more desperate the powerful families became. They hired private investigators, used their connections, and tried to close in on him. John stayed ahead of them, using his training and instincts to evade capture. One evening, as John was making his way back to the hospital, he received a call from Tom. "We've got intel on a meeting. The parents are gathering tonight. This could be our chance to expose them all at once." John considered the plan. It was risky, but it could bring everything to a head. He agreed, and they set their plan in motion. That night, John and his comrades infiltrated the meeting. They recorded conversations, gathered evidence, and ensured that every detail was documented. As the parents discussed their attempts to cover up the incident and protect their children, John felt a grim satisfaction. The following morning, the evidence was released to the media. The public outrage was immediate and overwhelming. The powerful families found themselves under intense scrutiny, their attempts to manipulate the system laid bare for all to see. As the legal battles began, John knew his fight was far from over. But he had taken the first step towards justice for Lily. He returned to the hospital, sitting by her side once more. "Rest now, Lily," he whispered. "We're going to make sure this never happens again." Emma entered the room, her eyes filled with gratitude and relief. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." Chapter 3. Gathering Intel. John, Reaper, Harris had made a vow as he sat by his granddaughter Lily's hospital bed. her fragile body supported by a tangle of medical tubes and beeping machines. The peaceful life he had built in his retirement had been shattered, and the disciplined soldier within him had been reawakened. With his daughter Emma by his side, John knew that he had to act swiftly and decisively to uncover the truth and bring justice to Lily. The first step in his mission was to gather intelligence. The names Emma had given him, Bradley Walker, Charlie Hastings, Ethan Cole, Madison Gray, Ryan Shaw, Sophie Grant, Jackson Blake, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross, were a starting point. Each of these children came from families with deep pockets and powerful connections, making John's task all the more challenging. But he was undeterred. He had faced greater obstacles before and emerged victorious. John began his investigation by compiling detailed dossiers on each of the bullies. He leveraged his extensive network of contacts, from former military comrades to private investigators. Within days, he had gathered substantial information on each target. His penthouse became a war room, with files, photographs, and maps spread out across the large dining table. He methodically analyzed every detail, looking for patterns, weaknesses, and opportunities. Bradley Walker, the ringleader, was the son of Senator James Walker, a man with immense political influence. Bradley's arrogance was well documented, and he had a history of using his father's position to escape consequences. John found evidence of past incidents where Bradley had bullied other students, but each case had been quietly settled out of court. Charlie Hastings was the daughter of a high-ranking judge. Her privileged upbringing had made her entitled and cruel. She was known for manipulating others and using her father's judicial power to shield herself from any repercussions. Charlie was particularly dangerous because she understood the legal system and how to exploit it. Ethan Cole, heir to a major corporate empire, was next on John's list. Ethan's father controlled a conglomerate with interests in various industries, including media, making him a formidable adversary. Ethan was spoiled and reckless, often flaunting his wealth and connections. John found several instances where Ethan had caused trouble, only to have his father's lawyers swoop in and make the problems disappear. Madison Gray was the niece of the police commissioner. Her family's connections within the law enforcement community provided her with a sense of invincibility. Madison's bullying was often psychological, leveraging her uncle's position to intimidate others. John noted that she had a particularly cruel streak, taking pleasure in the suffering of others. Ryan Shaw was the son of a renowned lawyer. His father's legal expertise meant that Ryan always had a safety net. Ryan was known for his charm, which masked a deeply manipulative personality. He often played the role of the instigator, encouraging others to do his dirty work while keeping his hands clean. Sophie Grant was the daughter of a tech mogul. Her family's influence in the technology sector made them powerful and difficult to challenge. Sophie used social media as a weapon, spreading rumors and coordinating bullying campaigns online. Her actions were often hidden behind a veneer of innocence, making her difficult to expose. Jackson Blake was the nephew of the state governor. His family's political connections made him untouchable in the eyes of many. Jackson was physically imposing and often used his size to intimidate others. He was a brute, relying on fear and violence to assert his dominance. Haley Brooks was the daughter of a media tycoon. Her father's control over several major news outlets gave her a unique form of power. Haley was adept at spinning stories to her advantage, creating narratives that protected her and vilified her victims. John found evidence of her orchestrating smear campaigns against anyone who opposed her. Lucas Reed was the son of a wealthy real estate magnate. His family's wealth allowed him to live a life of luxury and excess. Lucas was known for throwing extravagant parties where the rules didn't apply. He often used these gatherings as opportunities to target and humiliate those he deemed beneath him. Victoria Cross was the daughter of a military general. Her father's reputation and connections within the armed forces provided her with a shield of protection. Victoria was ruthless, using her father's position to cover up her actions. She was strategic and calculated, making her one of the most dangerous of the group. John's investigation also revealed the intricate web of connections between these families. They attended the same social events, supported each other's endeavors, and often conspired to maintain their power and influence. The realization that he was up against such a formidable network only strengthened John's resolve. He had fought against powerful adversaries before, and he would do so again for Lily. With the dossiers complete, John began planning his next moves. He knew that direct confrontation would be risky. These families had the resources to fight back. Instead, he decided to use his skills in intelligence and strategy to dismantle their protection piece by piece. John started by tracking their movements, using a combination of surveillance and hacking. He tapped into security cameras, monitored their social media accounts, and even placed discrete bugs in their homes and vehicles. His military training in covert operations proved invaluable, allowing him to gather information without being detected. One evening, while reviewing the data he had collected, John noticed a pattern. The bullies often met at a local country club, a place where their families gathered to socialize and conduct business. This club was a hub of activity, making it the perfect place to gather additional intelligence. Disguised as a potential new member, John infiltrated the country club. He observed the interactions between the bullies and their parents, noting the dynamics and power plays. He recorded conversations and gathered evidence of their complicity in covering up Lily's incident. Each piece of information brought him closer to his goal. During one of these visits, John overheard a conversation between Bradley Walker and his father. Bradley was bragging about how easily they had managed to silence the school and the witnesses. Senator Walker laughed, dismissing the incident as a minor inconvenience that would soon be forgotten. John felt a surge of anger but remained composed. He knew he had to be patient. John also discovered that the school principal, Mr. Jenkins, had been complicit in the cover-up. Jenkins had received substantial donations from several of the families, ensuring that any complaints against their children were quickly buried. John gathered evidence of these transactions, knowing that exposing Jenkins would be a crucial step in his plan. As John continued to gather intel, he kept Emma informed of his progress. She was torn between relief that someone was taking action and fear for her father's safety. "Dad, please be careful," she urged him during one of their conversations. "These people are dangerous. I don't want anything to happen to you." "Don't worry, Emma," John reassured her. "I've dealt with worse. We'll get justice for Lily. I promise." Emma's faith in her father never wavered, but she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that accompanied each new revelation. She spent her days by Lily's bedside, hoping and praying for her daughter's recovery. The doctors remained cautiously optimistic, but the uncertainty was a heavy burden. Meanwhile, John's old comrades continued to provide support. Tom, Ace, McAllister, in particular, had been instrumental in helping John gather intel. Tom had access to resources that were beyond John's reach, and his loyalty was unwavering. Together, they formed a formidable team. One evening, as John and Tom reviewed their findings, they discussed their next move. "We have enough to expose Jenkins," John said. "But we need to hit them where it hurts. We need to dismantle their network of protection." Tom nodded. "We can start with their finances. If we can disrupt their cash flow, they'll be too busy dealing with the fallout to fight back effectively." John agreed. "I'll focus on gathering more evidence. We need to ensure that when we strike, it's a decisive blow." Over the next few weeks, John and Tom meticulously planned their operations. They hacked into financial records, uncovering a web of illegal transactions and corrupt dealings. Each discovery brought them closer to their goal. One night, while John was deep into his work, he received a call from Emma. "Dad, Lily's starting to show signs of improvement," she said, her voice filled with hope. "The doctors think she might wake up soon." John felt a surge of relief and joy. "That's wonderful news, Emma. I'll be there first thing in the morning." The next day, John arrived at the hospital early. He found Emma by Lily's bedside, her face a mixture of exhaustion and hope. Lily's eyes fluttered open for a moment, and John felt tears well up in his eyes. "Hey, sweetheart," he whispered, taking her hand. "We're here for you." Lily's recovery added a new urgency to John's mission. He knew he had to act swiftly to ensure her safety and bring those responsible to justice. He redoubled his efforts, working late into the night to finalize their plan. As the pieces of their strategy fell into place, John and Tom prepared for the final phase of their operation. They had gathered enough evidence to expose the corruption and dismantle the network of protection around the bullies. It was time to strike. The first step was to expose Principal Jenkins. John leaked the evidence of his complicity to the media, ensuring that the story would gain maximum exposure. The backlash was immediate and severe. Jenkins was forced to resign, and the school faced intense scrutiny. Next, John and Tom targeted the family's finances. They released information about the illegal transactions and corrupt dealings, triggering investigations and freezing assets. The families found themselves under siege, their influence waning as their secrets were laid bare. As the legal battles unfolded, John knew that he had to remain vigilant. The families were desperate, and desperate people could be dangerous. But he also knew that they were losing their power, their ability to manipulate the system crumbling. One evening, as John sat in his study reviewing the latest developments, his phone buzzed with a message from Tom. "It's done. We've exposed everything. They're finished." John felt a sense of satisfaction. The journey was far from over, but they had taken a significant step towards justice for Lily. He made his way to the hospital, where Emma and Lily were waiting. Entering Lily's room, John saw his granddaughter's eyes light up with recognition. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice weak but filled with emotion. John smiled, tears in his eyes. "I'm here, Lily. We're going to make sure you're safe. They won't hurt you again." Emma looked at her father, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." Chapter 4. The First Strike. John, Reaper. Harris sat in his study, meticulously reviewing the detailed dossier on Bradley Walker, the ringleader of the group of bullies who had tormented his granddaughter, Lily. The senator's son was arrogant, reckless, and thought himself untouchable. But John knew better. He had faced men far more dangerous and powerful than Bradley, and each time he had emerged victorious. As he formulated his plan, John felt a familiar sense of calm wash over him. This was his element, strategizing, planning, executing with precision. His years in the special forces had trained him well for situations like this, where patience and precision were key. He knew that he had to be careful, meticulous in his approach to ensure that his actions were untraceable. Bradley's daily routine was well documented. He was a creature of habit, making it easy for John to predict his movements. Bradley often visited an upscale gym after school, a place frequented by the city's elite. It was there that John decided to make his move. Disguised as a maintenance worker, John infiltrated the gym. He spent several days observing Bradley, noting his routines, his interactions, and the security measures in place. John used this time to familiarize himself with the layout of the building, identifying potential points of entry and exit, as well as any surveillance systems that could pose a threat. One evening, when the gym was relatively quiet, John made his move. He tampered with the weights in Bradley's preferred workout area, ensuring that the equipment would malfunction at a critical moment. It was a subtle act, one that would appear to be nothing more than a tragic accident. The next day, Bradley arrived at the gym, oblivious to the danger that awaited him. John watched from a discreet distance as Bradley began his workout, lifting weights with his usual arrogance. As Bradley pushed himself harder, the tampered weights gave way, causing a catastrophic failure. The barbell crashed down, pinning Bradley beneath it. The impact was severe, and the panic in the gym was immediate. John remained calm, blending into the background as chaos erupted around him. The gym staff rushed to Bradley's aid, but it was too late. The ambulance arrived quickly, but Bradley was pronounced dead at the scene. The official report would later classify the incident as a tragic accident, a malfunction of the equipment that led to an unforeseen fatality. News of Bradley's death spread rapidly, sending shockwaves through the privileged community. The other bullies, those who had tormented Lily alongside Bradley, were struck with fear. If someone like Bradley could meet such a sudden and violent end, they knew they were not safe. The message was clear. Actions had consequences, and no amount of wealth or influence could shield them. John watched the news coverage with a grim satisfaction. Bradley's death was the first strike, a calculated move to dismantle the network of protection surrounding these bullies. He knew that the other families would be scrambling, trying to figure out what had happened and who might be next. It was exactly what he wanted. With Bradley eliminated, John turned his attention to the next target on his list, Charlie Hastings. The judge's daughter was cunning and manipulative, using her father's judicial power to shield herself from any repercussions. John knew that he needed to be even more careful with her. Unlike Bradley, Charlie was not physically imposing, but her intellect and connections made her a formidable adversary. John began gathering information on Charlie, using the same methods that had served him well with Bradley. He tracked her movements, studied her routines, and infiltrated her social circles under various disguises. He learned that she had a penchant for exclusive parties and social events, often attending high-profile gatherings with her father's influential friends. John decided to strike at one such event, a charity gala hosted by one of the city's elite. It was the perfect setting, crowded, chaotic, and full of potential distractions. John posed as a caterer, blending in seamlessly with the staff. He spent the evening observing Charlie, noting her interactions and identifying the best moment to act. As the night wore on, John saw his opportunity. Charlie excused herself from the main event, heading towards a secluded balcony for some fresh air. John followed, ensuring that they were alone. He approached her quietly, his presence masked by the ambient noise of the party. "Charlie Hastings," he said, his voice low and menacing. Charlie turned, her eyes widening with recognition. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to mask her fear with bravado. "Someone who knows what you did to Lily," John replied, stepping closer. "And someone who's going to make sure you pay for it." Before Charlie could react, John incapacitated her with a swift, precise move. He injected her with a fast-acting sedative, rendering her unconscious. He worked quickly, staging the scene to look like an accidental fall from the balcony. The positioning, the angle, everything was calculated to ensure that it would be deemed an accident. When Charlie was discovered, the gala erupted into chaos. The police were called, and an investigation was launched, but it yielded no evidence of foul play. Another tragic accident, another untouchable bully eliminated. As the news of Charlie's death spread, the fear among the remaining bullies intensified. Ethan Cole, Madison Gray, Ryan Shaw, Sophie Grant, Jackson Blake, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross were now living in a state of constant paranoia. They knew that someone was targeting them, but they had no idea who or why. John watched from the shadows, satisfied that his plan was working. Each strike not only removed a threat but also sent a clear message. Justice would be served, one way or another. He knew that the remaining targets would be more cautious, but he was prepared. He had faced adversaries who were far more dangerous and resourceful. As John prepared for his next move, he received an unexpected call from Tom, Ace, McAllister. "Reaper, we've got a situation," Tom said, his tone urgent. "The police are getting closer to figuring out someone's targeting these kids. They've increased security around the families." John considered this new development. He knew that increased security would make his mission more challenging, but it also meant that the bullies were feeling the pressure. Thanks for the heads up, Ace. I'll adjust my plans accordingly. John decided to shift his focus to Ethan Cole, the corporate heir. Ethan's father controlled a vast business empire, and their wealth and connections made them particularly dangerous. John knew that he needed to be strategic, using his skills in subterfuge and deception. Ethan was known for his reckless behavior and love of fast cars. John decided to exploit this weakness. He spent days observing Ethan, noting his favorite haunts and routines. He discovered that Ethan often took late-night drives in his high-end sports car, pushing the limits of speed and recklessness. John tampered with Ethan's car, ensuring that a critical component would fail at high speed. He knew that the malfunction would appear to be an accident, just another case of a reckless young man pushing too far. He watched from a distance as Ethan sped down a deserted highway, the car suddenly veering out of control and crashing in a spectacular fashion. The news of Ethan's death added another layer of fear among the remaining bullies. The pattern was becoming clear, and the families were desperate to protect their children. Security was tightened, and private investigators were hired to uncover the person responsible for the deaths. John knew that he needed to remain vigilant. The stakes were higher now, and any misstep could expose him. But he was undeterred. Each successful strike brought him closer to justice for Lily, and he was willing to risk everything to achieve that goal. As he prepared for his next target, Madison Gray, John reflected on the journey so far. He had eliminated 3 of the bullies, each death meticulously planned and executed. The fear he had instilled in the remaining targets was palpable, and he knew that they were living in constant paranoia. Madison was different from Bradley and Ethan. She was more cautious, more aware of her surroundings. Her connection to the police commissioner added an extra layer of complexity to John's plan. But he was patient, willing to wait for the perfect moment to strike. John discovered that Madison had a weekly routine of visiting a secluded park for a morning jog. It was a habit that offered him the opportunity he needed. He carefully planned his approach, ensuring that he could execute his plan without leaving any traces. On the morning of the jog, John positioned himself along Madison's route, disguised as a fellow jogger. He waited for her to pass, then followed at a distance, gradually closing the gap. As they reached a particularly isolated section of the park, John made his move. He incapacitated Madison with a swift, precise maneuver, injecting her with a fast-acting toxin that would mimic a heart attack. He positioned her body to appear as though she had collapsed naturally during her run. By the time anyone found her, the toxin would have dissipated, leaving no trace of foul play. Madison's death was another blow to the group of bullies. The families were now in a state of heightened alert, their desperation growing. The police were under immense pressure to solve the cases, but they had no leads, no evidence to follow. John knew that he had to be more careful than ever. The remaining targets, Ryan Shaw, Sophie Grant, Jackson Blake, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross, would be more cautious, more protected. But he was determined. He would not rest until justice was served for Lily. Chapter 5. Fear takes root. The news of Bradley Walker's sudden and tragic death spread through the city like wildfire. The son of Senator James Walker, Bradley was known for his arrogance and untouchable demeanor, a product of his privileged upbringing. His untimely demise at the gym, labeled as a tragic accident, sent shockwaves through the elite circles of society. The group of bullies who had tormented Lily Harris was now gripped by a fear they had never known. John Reaper Harris watched the news coverage with a grim satisfaction. Bradley's death had been the first strike in his campaign for justice, a calculated move designed to send a clear message. John knew that fear was a powerful tool, one that could dismantle the false sense of security these privileged youths had built around themselves. The remaining bullies, Charlie Hastings, Ethan Cole, Madison Gray, Ryan Shaw, Sophie Grant, Jackson Blake, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross, were now living in a state of heightened paranoia. Their parents, who wielded significant power and influence, were scrambling to protect their children. Private security firms were hired, and the police presence around their homes was increased. But despite these measures, the fear persisted. John's meticulous planning ensured that no traces led back to him. He had executed Bradley's death with precision, leaving no evidence of foul play. Each step of his plan was designed to maintain his anonymity, to keep his actions hidden in the shadows. He knew that the families would be desperate to find the person responsible, but he was prepared for their efforts. The city's elite community was abuzz with speculation and rumors. Bradley's death, followed closely by Charlie Hastings' fatal accident at the charity gala and Ethan Cole's high-speed crash, painted a disturbing picture. The pattern was becoming clear, and the families were growing increasingly desperate to protect their children. At the same time, John continued to gather information on his next targets. The fear he had instilled was working in his favor, making the bullies more cautious and predictable. They were withdrawing from their usual social activities, limiting their interactions, and relying heavily on their parents' protection. This made them easier to track and observe. John spent his days blending into the background, assuming different identities to move through the city unnoticed. He frequented the places his targets visited, listening to their conversations and noting their routines. His military training in surveillance and reconnaissance was invaluable, allowing him to gather the information he needed without drawing attention. One afternoon, as John sat in a quiet cafe, he overheard a conversation between two of the bullies, Ryan Shaw and Lucas Reed. They were discussing the recent events with a mix of fear and bravado, trying to reassure themselves that they were safe. "This can't be happening," Ryan said, his voice tinged with anxiety. "First Bradley, then Charlie, and now Ethan. Who's next?" Lucas, attempting to maintain his composure, replied, "It's just a coincidence. Accidents happen. Our parents will protect us." John noted their fear, understanding that it was only a matter of time before their facade of confidence crumbled completely. He continued to listen, gathering more details about their plans and routines. Meanwhile, the media frenzy around the deaths was intensifying. Reporters speculated on the connections between the incidents, while the police issued statements reassuring the public that they were investigating thoroughly. The families, desperate to control the narrative, held press conferences to express their grief and demand justice. But behind the scenes, they were scrambling to cover their tracks and protect their secrets. John's next target was Madison Gray. The niece of the police commissioner, Madison was particularly dangerous because of her connections within law enforcement. Her bullying of Lily had been psychological and relentless, leveraging her uncle's position to intimidate and manipulate. John knew that he had to be exceptionally careful with her. Madison had become increasingly reclusive, limiting her movements to a few familiar places. She spent most of her time at her family's estate, a heavily guarded property on the outskirts of the city. John spent days observing the estate, noting the security measures and identifying potential vulnerabilities. One evening, John saw his opportunity. Madison had a habit of taking solitary walks through the estate's expansive gardens. The security presence was focused primarily on the perimeter, leaving the interior relatively unguarded. John used the cover of darkness to infiltrate the estate, moving silently through the shadows. He approached Madison as she strolled through the garden, her mind seemingly elsewhere. Before she could react, John incapacitated her with a precise, non-lethal blow. He then staged the scene to look like a tragic fall down a set of stone steps. The angle of her body and the placement of the foliage ensured that it would be deemed an accident. When Madison was discovered, the estate erupted into chaos. The police commissioner was beside himself with grief and anger, but there was no evidence to suggest foul play. Another accident, another privileged youth eliminated. The fear among the remaining bullies reached a fever pitch. Ryan Shaw, Sophie Grant, Jackson Blake, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross were now living in a state of constant paranoia. Their parents, despite their power and influence, were unable to provide the security and reassurance their children desperately needed. John continued to monitor their movements, noting how the fear was affecting their behavior. Ryan had become increasingly withdrawn, avoiding public places and relying heavily on his father's security detail. Sophie had retreated to her family's private estate, limiting her interactions to a select few trusted friends. Jackson, known for his bravado, was now surrounded by bodyguards at all times, his confidence shaken. Haley had taken to traveling with a personal security team, while Lucas had hired private investigators to find the person responsible. Victoria, the daughter of a military general, was relying on her father's connections to ensure her safety. Despite their efforts, John remained undetected. His experience in covert operations allowed him to stay one step ahead, anticipating their moves and adapting his strategies accordingly. He knew that the fear he had instilled was his greatest weapon, disrupting their lives and making them more predictable. As John prepared for his next move, he received an unexpected call from Emma. "Dad, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice filled with urgency. John felt a pang of concern. "What is it, Emma? Is Lily okay?" "She's stable, but I overheard something at the hospital. One of the nurses was talking about increased security around some of the other patients. It sounds like the families are getting desperate." John listened carefully, understanding the implications. The increased security meant that the families were feeling the pressure, but it also meant that they might be getting closer to uncovering his identity. He needed to act swiftly and decisively to maintain his advantage. "Thanks for the heads up, Emma," John said. "I'll be careful. Just focus on taking care of Lily." "I will, Dad. Please be safe." John ended the call and considered his next steps. The fear he had instilled was working, but he needed to maintain the pressure. His next target was Ryan Shaw, the son of a renowned lawyer. Ryan's manipulative personality and charm made him a dangerous adversary, but John knew that fear would be his undoing. Ryan had become increasingly isolated, avoiding public places and relying on his father's security detail. John decided to exploit this isolation, using it to create an atmosphere of paranoia and mistrust. He began by sending anonymous messages to Ryan, hinting at the deaths of his friends and suggesting that he was next. The messages had the desired effect. Ryan's paranoia grew, causing him to withdraw further and trust even fewer people. John then orchestrated a series of events designed to reinforce Ryan's fear. He tampered with Ryan's car, causing a minor but unsettling malfunction. He hacked into Ryan's home security system, creating false alerts that suggested someone was trying to break in. The culmination of John's plan came one night when Ryan was home alone. John used a drone to deliver a package to Ryan's doorstep. The package contained a recording of Bradley, Charlie, Ethan, and Madison, edited to suggest that they were speaking from beyond the grave. The message was clear. Ryan was next. The psychological impact of the package was immediate and severe. Ryan's paranoia reached its breaking point, leading him to flee his home in a panic. John tracked his movements, knowing that Ryan's fear would drive him to make mistakes. Ryan sought refuge at a secluded cabin owned by his family, believing it to be a safe haven. But John was already there, waiting. As Ryan entered the cabin, he was met with a series of booby traps that John had carefully set up. Each trap was designed to disorient and terrify, further breaking down Ryan's mental state. The final trap was a simple yet effective mechanism that caused a heavy bookshelf to collapse, pinning Ryan beneath it. The scene was staged to look like an unfortunate accident, the result of Ryan's frantic attempt to secure himself in the cabin. Ryan's death, like the others, was ruled an accident. The fear among the remaining bullies intensified, their paranoia now bordering on hysteria. Sophie Grant, Jackson Blake, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross were now living in a state of constant fear, their lives dominated by the shadow of an unseen enemy. Chapter 6. Ethan's Downfall. John Reaper Harris watched the news reports of Ryan Shaw's tragic death, the latest in a series of accidents that had befallen the group of privileged bullies. The fear among the remaining culprits, Sophie Grant, Jackson Blake, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross, was now palpable. Each death had tightened the noose of fear around them, and John was determined to maintain the pressure. His next target was Ethan Cole, the heir to a major corporate empire. Ethan's father controlled a vast business network, making their family one of the most influential and powerful in the city. Ethan was spoiled and reckless, often flaunting his wealth and connections. John knew that he needed to approach this target with even greater care, as the Cole family had extensive resources at their disposal. John began by gathering detailed intelligence on Ethan. He discovered that Ethan's lifestyle was centered around luxury and excess. He frequently attended exclusive parties, stayed at high-end hotels, and was constantly surrounded by a retinue of bodyguards and assistants. John knew that infiltrating Ethan's security would require precision and patience. To start, John assumed the identity of a private security consultant. With a forged background and impeccable references, he managed to secure a temporary position with the security firm that provided protection for the Cole family. This role gave him the access he needed to study Ethan's security detail from the inside. John spent several weeks observing Ethan's routines, learning the habits and weaknesses of his security team. He took note of their schedules, the shifts they worked, and the measures they took to protect Ethan. He also paid close attention to Ethan's personal habits, where he liked to eat, his favorite drinks, and the places he frequented most often. One evening, John found the perfect opportunity to strike. Ethan was scheduled to attend an exclusive gala at a five-star hotel. The event was high-profile, with extensive media coverage and tight security. John knew that the chaos and activity of the gala would provide the perfect cover for his plan. Using his position within the security team, John was able to gain access to Ethan's suite at the hotel. He carefully timed his actions, ensuring that he entered the suite during a brief window when the room would be unoccupied and the security detail would be focused on the event downstairs. Once inside, John worked quickly and efficiently. He administered a lethal, undetectable poison to Ethan's favorite bottle of whiskey, knowing that Ethan had a habit of indulging in a drink after his public appearances. The poison was a sophisticated compound that John had acquired through his military contacts, undetectable by standard toxicology tests and designed to mimic a natural heart attack. John left the suite as discreetly as he had entered, confident that his actions would go unnoticed. He rejoined the security team and resumed his role, blending seamlessly into the background. As the night progressed, he kept a close watch on Ethan, waiting for the poison to take effect. The gala eventually wound down, and Ethan retired to his suite, unaware of the danger that awaited him. John observed from a distance as Ethan poured himself a drink, raising the glass in a silent toast before taking a sip. Within moments, the poison began to take effect. Ethan clutched his chest, his face contorting in pain as he collapsed to the floor. The ensuing panic was immediate. Ethan's bodyguards rushed to his aid, but it was too late. By the time paramedics arrived, Ethan was already dead. The official cause of death was ruled as a heart attack, a tragic but not uncommon event given Ethan's lifestyle of excess. News of Ethan Cole's death sent shockwaves through the privileged community. The fear among the remaining bullies intensified, their paranoia now bordering on hysteria. Sophie Grant, Jackson Blake, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross were living in a constant state of terror, their lives dominated by the shadow of an unseen enemy. The Cole family, with all their resources, launched an independent investigation into Ethan's death. They hired private detectives, forensic experts, and even reached out to international contacts, desperate to uncover any hint of foul play. But John's meticulous planning ensured that no traces led back to him. The poison he had used was undetectable, and his infiltration of Ethan's security had been flawless. As John watched the media coverage, he felt a grim satisfaction. The fear he had instilled was working. Each death was a calculated move to dismantle the network of protection around these privileged youths, ensuring that they would face the consequences of their actions. John knew that the remaining targets would be even more cautious now. The increased security measures, the constant paranoia, it all played into his hands, making them more predictable and easier to track. He continued to monitor their movements, using his skills in surveillance and reconnaissance to stay one step ahead. One evening, as John reviewed the data he had collected, he received an unexpected call from Tom, Ace, McAllister. "Reaper, I've got some intel you need to hear," Tom said, his voice urgent. "What's going on, Ace?" John asked, his attention focused. "The Cole family isn't backing down. They're bringing in some serious muscle, ex-military types, private contractors. They're not just looking for answers, they're looking for blood." John considered this new development. The increased security presence would make his task more challenging, but it also confirmed that his actions were having the desired effect. The families were desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. "Thanks for the heads up, Ace. I'll adjust my plans accordingly." John knew that he needed to be more cautious than ever. The heightened security and the involvement of private contractors posed new risks, but he was undeterred. He had faced greater challenges before, and he would continue to adapt and overcome. His next target was Sophie Grant, the daughter of a tech mogul. Sophie had been particularly cruel to Lily, using her influence to orchestrate online bullying campaigns and spread malicious rumors. John knew that Sophie's downfall would have to be handled with care, as her family's connections in the tech industry provided them with significant resources and capabilities. John began by infiltrating the circles Sophie frequented. He assumed various identities, attending social events and gatherings where Sophie was present. He gathered information on her habits, her routines, and her weaknesses. He learned that Sophie had a penchant for exclusive, high-tech gadgets and often attended tech expos and product launches. One such event was scheduled to take place in a few weeks, a high-profile tech conference where Sophie's father was set to unveil a new product. John saw this as the perfect opportunity to strike. The conference would be crowded, chaotic, and full of potential distractions. Using his skills in cyber warfare, John hacked into the conference's security systems, gaining access to the event's schedule, security protocols, and attendee list. He identified a vulnerable point in Sophie's itinerary, a private demonstration she was scheduled to attend in a secluded part of the venue. On the day of the conference, John posed as a technician, using forged credentials to gain access to the restricted areas. He positioned himself near the demonstration room, waiting for Sophie to arrive. As she entered the room, John activated a series of pre-programmed hacks, disabling the security cameras and creating a temporary blind spot. With the cameras disabled, John made his move. He approached Sophie from behind, injecting her with a fast-acting toxin designed to mimic a severe allergic reaction. The toxin was another sophisticated compound, undetectable by standard toxicology tests and capable of causing a fatal anaphylactic shock within minutes. Sophie's reaction was immediate and severe. She collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath as the toxin took effect. By the time security personnel arrived, she was already dead. The cause of death was ruled as an unexpected allergic reaction, a tragic but not uncommon occurrence. The news of Sophie Grant's death added another layer of fear among the remaining bullies. Jackson Blake, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross were now living in a state of constant terror. Their parents, despite their power and influence, were unable to provide the security and reassurance their children desperately needed. John continued to monitor their movements, noting how the fear was affecting their behavior. Jackson had become increasingly aggressive, surrounding himself with bodyguards and isolating himself from his usual social circles. Haley had taken to traveling with a personal security team, avoiding public appearances and limiting her interactions. Lucas had hired private investigators to find the person responsible, while Victoria relied on her father's military connections to ensure her safety. Despite their efforts, John remained undetected. His experience in covert operations allowed him to stay one step ahead, anticipating their moves and adapting his strategies accordingly. He knew that the fear he had instilled was his greatest weapon, disrupting their lives and making them more vulnerable. As John prepared for his next move, he remained ever vigilant, aware that the increased security and desperation of the families posed new challenges. But his resolve was unbreakable. The Reaper had returned, and he would not rest until those who had hurt his granddaughter faced the consequences of their actions. Each strike, each calculated move, brought him closer to his goal. The fear he had sown was taking root, dismantling the sense of invincibility that had protected these privileged youths. John knew that the fight for justice was far from over, but he was ready. He would continue to strike from the shadows, dismantling the network of protection that surrounded the bullies, one by one. Chapter 7. The Corruption Unveiled. John, Reaper, Harris sat in the shadows of his dimly lit study, reviewing the latest information he had gathered on his targets. The fear he had instilled in the group of privileged bullies was palpable, their lives dominated by paranoia and a constant sense of impending doom. With Ethan Cole's death still fresh in the minds of the elite, John turned his attention to uncovering the deeper layers of corruption that protected these youths. John knew that dismantling the network of protection around Sophie Grant, Jackson Blake, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross would require more than just eliminating them one by one. He needed to expose the systemic corruption that allowed them to act with impunity. His mission was about justice, not just revenge, and that meant bringing the entire rotten structure crashing down. To achieve this, John began by focusing on the law enforcement officers who seemed complicit in covering up the crimes of these privileged families. He knew that many of these officers were on the payroll of the powerful parents, turning a blind eye to their children's misdeeds in exchange for financial gain or political favors. John's first step was to infiltrate the police department's internal network. Using his skills in cyber warfare, he hacked into the department's databases, searching for any signs of corruption. It didn't take long for him to find what he was looking for: suspicious transactions, unexplained wealth, and patterns of behavior that indicated officers were receiving bribes. One name stood out: Captain Frank Mills, a high-ranking officer with a reputation for turning a blind eye to the misdeeds of the city's elite. Mills had been involved in numerous cases where evidence had mysteriously disappeared. Witnesses had recanted their statements, and charges had been dropped without explanation. John knew that Mills was a key figure in the corrupt network protecting the bullies. John decided to gather more information on Mills. He started by surveilling him, tracking his movements and interactions. It became clear that Mills was living well beyond his means. His lavish lifestyle included a luxury home, expensive cars, and frequent trips to exclusive resorts, all far beyond what a police captain's salary could afford. Using this information, John formulated a plan to expose Mills and, by extension, the corruption within the police department. He began by leaking evidence of Mills' unexplained wealth to the media, ensuring that it would spark an investigation. The story quickly gained traction, with reporters digging into Mills' finances and questioning his sudden rise to affluence. The public outcry was immediate. The police department was forced to launch an internal investigation, and Mills was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. But John knew this was just the beginning. He needed to connect Mills to the families of the bullies to expose the full extent of the corruption. John continued to dig deeper, following the money trail from Mills to the powerful families. He discovered that large sums of money had been funneled through various shell companies and offshore accounts, all leading back to the parents of the bullies. These financial transactions were cleverly disguised, but John's expertise in cyber forensics allowed him to unravel the complex web. As he gathered more evidence, John realized that the corruption extended far beyond Mills. Several other high-ranking officers were also involved, creating a network of protection that ensured the privileged youths could act with impunity. This network included officers who tampered with evidence, intimidated witnesses, and obstructed justice. John knew he needed to act swiftly to expose this corruption before the families could cover their tracks. He compiled a comprehensive dossier of evidence, detailing the financial transactions, the connections between the officers and the families, and the specific cases that had been compromised. With the dossier complete, John reached out to a trusted contact in the media, an investigative journalist named Rachel Alvarez. Rachel had a reputation for uncovering high-profile corruption and was known for her integrity and tenacity. John knew she would be the perfect ally in his quest for justice. John arranged a clandestine meeting with Rachel in a secluded park late at night. Disguised and cautious, he handed her the dossier, explaining the depth of the corruption and the evidence he had gathered. Rachel listened intently, her eyes widening as she flipped through the pages. "This is explosive, John," Rachel said, her voice filled with a mix of awe and determination. "If this is true, it's going to shake the city to its core." "It is true," John replied, "but you need to move quickly. The families will try to cover this up as soon as they realize what's happening." Rachel nodded, her mind already racing with plans to verify the information and publish the story. "I'll get my team on this immediately. We'll make sure the truth comes out." Over the next few days, Rachel and her team worked tirelessly to verify the evidence. They interviewed witnesses, followed the money trail, and corroborated John's findings. The more they dug, the more they uncovered, painting a damning picture of systemic corruption within the police department and the privileged families. As the story broke, the city was rocked by scandal. The headlines were filled with details of the corruption, the bribes, and the cover-ups. Public outrage grew as more information came to light, and calls for accountability echoed across the city. The police department was thrown into turmoil, with several high-ranking officers, including Captain Mills, being arrested and charged with corruption. The privileged families were not spared either. The financial transactions linking them to the corrupt officers were exposed, and they faced intense scrutiny and legal action. Their attempts to use their influence to silence the story were futile in the face of overwhelming public pressure. For the remaining bullies, Sophie Grant, Jackson Blake, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross, their sense of security was shattered. The network of protection they had relied on was crumbling, leaving them vulnerable and exposed. They were now living in constant fear, knowing that the unseen enemy who had targeted their friends could strike at any moment. John watched the developments with a sense of grim satisfaction. His plan was working. The corruption that had protected these privileged youths was being dismantled, and justice was being served. But he knew his mission was far from over. The remaining targets were still out there, and he needed to ensure they faced the consequences of their actions. John decided to focus on Sophie Grant next. With her father's connections in the tech industry, Sophie had been a major player in orchestrating the online bullying campaign against Lily. Her actions had been particularly insidious, using technology to spread rumors and harass Lily relentlessly. John knew that Sophie's downfall would require a different approach. He began by gathering intelligence on her father's company, GrandTech, a major player in the tech industry. Using his skills in cyber warfare, he hacked into the company's systems, searching for any evidence of wrongdoing. What he found was a treasure trove of incriminating information. GrandTech had been involved in numerous unethical practices, including data breaches, privacy violations, and illegal surveillance. John compiled the evidence, knowing that exposing these activities would not only bring down Sophie but also her father's entire empire. John formulated a plan to leak the information to the media, ensuring it would have maximum impact. He reached out to Rachel Alvarez once again, providing her with the evidence and explaining the connection to Sophie's actions. Rachel and her team worked quickly to verify the information and prepare the story. When it was published, it sent shockwaves through the tech industry. GrandTech's stock plummeted, and the company faced multiple investigations and lawsuits. The public outrage was immense, with calls for accountability and justice. Sophie's father, desperate to protect his company, was forced to step down as CEO. Sophie, who had relied on her father's influence and resources, found herself isolated and exposed. The online bullying campaign she had orchestrated was uncovered, and she faced legal action and public condemnation. The fear among the remaining bullies, Jackson Blake, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross, intensified. Their network of protection was crumbling, and they were now facing the very real prospect of being held accountable for their actions. John continued to monitor their movements, adapting his strategies as needed. He knew that the increased security and desperation of the families posed new challenges, but he was undeterred. Each strike, each calculated move, brought him closer to his goal. Jackson Blake was next on John's list. Known for his physical intimidation and brute force, Jackson had been a key player in the bullying of Lily. His family's political connections had shielded him from consequences, but John was determined to change that. John began by gathering intelligence on Jackson's father, a prominent state senator. He discovered that the senator had been involved in numerous corrupt dealings, including accepting bribes and engaging in illegal activities to maintain his power. John knew that exposing these activities would be a major blow to Jackson's sense of invincibility. Using his skills in cyber forensics, John hacked into the senator's private accounts, uncovering a wealth of incriminating evidence. He compiled the information, ensuring it was comprehensive and irrefutable. He then leaked the evidence to the media, knowing that the ensuing scandal would engulf Jackson and his family. The story broke with explosive impact. The senator's corrupt dealings were exposed, leading to a massive public outcry. The senator was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, and his political career was effectively destroyed. Jackson, who had relied on his father's power and influence, found himself isolated and vulnerable. As the scandal unfolded, John made his move against Jackson. He confronted him in a secluded area, ensuring there would be no witnesses. Jackson, already reeling from the public disgrace of his family, was no match for John's precision and skill. John incapacitated Jackson, leaving him in a state of shock and fear. The news of Jackson's downfall sent a clear message to the remaining bullies, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross. Their network of protection was gone, and they were now facing the very real consequences of their actions. The fear that John had instilled in them was now complete, and they were living in constant terror. John knew that his mission was nearing its conclusion. The corruption that had protected these privileged youths had been exposed and dismantled. Justice was being served, and the families were facing the consequences of their actions. As he prepared for his next move, John reflected on the journey so far. His fight for justice had been long and arduous, but it had been worth it. The privileged elite who had tormented Lily were now living in fear, their lives disrupted by an unseen enemy. John knew that his mission was dangerous, but he was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The fight for justice was personal, and he would see it through to the end. The Reaper had returned, and he would not rest until those who had hurt his granddaughter faced the full weight of the consequences. Each strike, each calculated move, brought him closer to his goal. The fear he had sown was taking root, and justice was finally within reach. Chapter 8. Madison's Demise. John, Reaper, Harris had methodically dismantled the network of corruption protecting the group of privileged bullies who had tormented his granddaughter, Lily. The fear among the remaining targets, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross, was now palpable. Their lives were dominated by paranoia and a constant sense of impending doom. John knew that the next strike had to be just as precise and untraceable as the previous ones to maintain the pressure and keep the fear alive. Madison Gray, the niece of the police commissioner, was his next target. Madison had been particularly ruthless in her bullying of Lily, leveraging her uncle's position within law enforcement to intimidate and manipulate others. Her psychological torment had left deep scars, and John was determined to ensure she faced the consequences of her actions. John began by studying Madison's routine. Despite the heightened security and constant paranoia, Madison had maintained some semblance of her previous lifestyle. She still attended her exclusive gym, visited her favorite cafes, and frequently drove her luxury car around the city. John knew that her car, a sleek and powerful sports model, would be the perfect instrument for her demise. To orchestrate a flawless car accident, John needed to ensure that every detail was meticulously planned. He spent days observing Madison's driving habits, noting the routes she took and the times she typically traveled. He identified a particular stretch of road on the outskirts of the city, a winding, secluded route with minimal traffic and no surveillance cameras. John used his skills in electronic warfare to gain access to Madison's car's onboard systems. Modern luxury cars were equipped with advanced electronics, including GPS, traction control, and even automated braking systems. John planned to exploit these features to create an accident that would appear entirely natural. One evening, as Madison left her gym and headed towards her car, John watched from a distance. He knew her route and had timed his plan to coincide with her usual departure. As she drove towards the secluded stretch of road, John activated a device he had previously planted on her car. The device allowed him to remotely control certain aspects of the vehicle's electronics. As Madison approached a particularly sharp turn, John deactivated the traction control and applied a subtle increase to the throttle. The car responded instantly, accelerating slightly as it entered the curve. Madison, caught off guard, struggled to regain control, but the sudden loss of traction sent the car careening off the road and into a ditch. The crash was violent and instantaneous. Madison's car collided with a tree, the impact crumpling the front end and deploying the airbags. John had ensured that the airbags would deploy a fraction of a second too late, reducing their effectiveness. The result was a devastating collision that left Madison critically injured. John observed from a distance, ensuring that no one had witnessed the accident. He waited for a few moments, confirming that Madison was unconscious and unable to call for help. Satisfied that his plan had succeeded, he retreated into the shadows, leaving the scene undisturbed. The following morning, news of Madison Gray's accident spread quickly. The official report described it as a tragic car accident, a combination of excessive speed and driver error. There was no evidence of foul play, no indication that the accident had been anything other than a terrible misfortune. The clean execution of Madison's demise had the desired effect. The remaining targets, Haley Brooks, Lucas Reed, and Victoria Cross, were now living in a state of heightened paranoia. The realization that Madison, despite her connections and precautions, had fallen victim to the unseen enemy only intensified their fear. John watched the news coverage with a grim satisfaction. Each successful strike not only eliminated a threat but also served to dismantle the sense of invincibility that had protected these privileged youths. The fear he had instilled was now complete, disrupting their lives and making them more vulnerable with each passing day. As John planned his next move, he continued to monitor the remaining targets. Haley Brooks, the daughter of a media tycoon, had become increasingly reclusive, avoiding public appearances and relying heavily on her father's security team. Lucas Reed, the son of a wealthy real estate magnate, had hired private investigators and surrounded himself with bodyguards. Victoria Cross, the daughter of a military general, was relying on her father's connections to ensure her safety. Despite their efforts, John remained undetected. His experience in covert operations allowed him to stay one step ahead, anticipating their moves and adapting his strategies accordingly. He knew that the fear he had instilled was his greatest weapon, disrupting their lives and making them more vulnerable. John decided to focus on Lucas Reed next. Known for his arrogance and sense of entitlement, Lucas had been a major player in the bullying of Lily. His family's wealth and influence had shielded him from consequences, but John was determined to change that. John began by gathering intelligence on Lucas's real estate empire. He discovered that Lucas's father had been involved in numerous shady dealings, including bribery and illegal land acquisitions. John knew that exposing these activities would be a major blow to Lucas's sense of invincibility. Using his skills in cyber forensics, John hacked into the real estate company's private accounts, uncovering a wealth of incriminating evidence. He compiled the information, ensuring it was comprehensive and irrefutable. He then leaked the evidence to the media, knowing that the ensuing scandal would engulf Lucas and his family. The story broke with explosive impact. The Reed family's corrupt dealings were exposed, leading to a massive public outcry. Lucas's father was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, and the real estate empire was thrown into turmoil. Lucas, who had relied on his father's power and influence, found himself isolated and vulnerable. As the scandal unfolded, John made his move against Lucas. He confronted him in a secluded parking garage, ensuring there would be no witnesses. Lucas, already reeling from the public disgrace of his family, was no match for John's precision and skill. John incapacitated Lucas, leaving him in a state of shock and fear. The news of Lucas's downfall sent a clear message to the remaining bullies, Haley Brooks and Victoria Cross. Their network of protection was gone, and they were now facing the very real consequences of their actions. The fear that John had instilled in them was now complete, and they were living in constant terror. John continued to monitor their movements, adapting his strategies as needed. He knew that the increased security and desperation of the families posed new challenges, but he was undeterred. Each strike, each calculated move, brought him closer to his goal. Haley Brooks was next on John's list. The daughter of a media tycoon, Haley had been particularly vicious in her bullying of Lily, using her father's media connections to spread rumors and harass Lily relentlessly. John knew that Haley's downfall would require a different approach, as her family's influence in the media provided them with significant resources and capabilities. John began by infiltrating the circles Haley frequented. He assumed various identities, attending social events and gatherings where Haley was present. He gathered information on her habits, her routines, and her weaknesses. He learned that Haley had a penchant for exclusive, high-profile events and often attended parties thrown by her father's business associates. One such event was scheduled to take place in a few weeks, a high-profile charity gala hosted by one of the city's elite. John saw this as the perfect opportunity to strike. The gala would be crowded, chaotic, and full of potential distractions. Using his skills in electronic warfare, John hacked into the event's security systems, gaining access to the guest list and the schedule. He identified a vulnerable point in Haley's itinerary, a private VIP lounge she was scheduled to visit during the event. On the night of the gala, John posed as a security consultant, using forged credentials to gain access to the restricted areas. He positioned himself near the VIP lounge, waiting for Haley to arrive. As she entered the lounge, John activated a series of pre-programmed hacks, disabling the security cameras and creating a temporary blind spot. With the cameras disabled, John made his move. He approached Haley from behind, injecting her with a fast-acting toxin designed to mimic a severe allergic reaction. The toxin was another sophisticated compound, undetectable by standard toxicology tests and capable of causing a fatal anaphylactic shock within minutes. Haley's reaction was immediate and severe. She collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath as the toxin took effect. By the time security personnel arrived, she was already dead. The cause of death was ruled as an unexpected allergic reaction, a tragic but not uncommon occurrence. The news of Haley Brooks's death added another layer of fear among the remaining bullies. Victoria Cross was now living in a state of constant terror. Her network of protection was crumbling, and she was facing the very real consequences of her actions. John knew that his mission was nearing its conclusion. The corruption that had protected these privileged youths had been exposed and dismantled. Justice was being served, and the families were facing the consequences of their actions. As he prepared for his next move, John reflected on the journey so far. His fight for justice had been long and arduous, but it had been worth it. The privileged elite who had tormented Lily were now living in fear, their lives disrupted by an unseen enemy. John knew that his mission was dangerous, but he was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 9. Allies in the Shadows. John, Reaper, Harris sat in his study, contemplating his next move. The series of meticulously executed plans had taken down several of the bullies who had tormented his granddaughter, Lily. Each strike had been precise, clean, and left no trace. But John knew that the remaining targets, Haley Brooks and Victoria Cross, were growing increasingly desperate and would be harder to reach. It was time to call in reinforcements. John reached out to his old comrades from the Special Forces unit he once led. These were men he trusted with his life, brothers forged in the crucible of combat. They had fought together in the most dangerous and covert operations around the globe. If anyone could help him carry out his mission with the same precision and secrecy, it was them. The first person John contacted was Tom, Ace, McAllister, his right-hand man and the best sniper he had ever known. Tom had retired to a quiet life in the mountains, but John knew he wouldn't hesitate to join the fight if called upon. Using an encrypted messaging service, John sent a simple message: "Need your help." For Lily. Within minutes, Tom replied, "On my way." Next, John reached out to David, Ghost Hunter, a master of infiltration and stealth. David had been living off the grid, using his skills to help others in need. John knew David would be more than willing to join him. The message was simple: "It's time." David's response came quickly: "Understood." Heading to rendezvous, John also contacted Mike Sledge Harris, no relation, a demolitions expert and the muscle of the group. Mike had been working as a private security consultant, but he owed John his life several times over. The message read, "Need the sledgehammer." Mike's reply was swift: "Consider it done." Finally, John reached out to Sarah Hawk Collins, their tech and communications expert. Sarah had been working in cybersecurity, but John knew she missed the adrenaline of their missions. The message was, "We fly again." Sarah's response was immediate, cleared for takeoff. Within 48 hours, John's old team assembled at a safe house on the outskirts of the city. The reunion was brief but heartfelt. Each of them had scars, both visible and invisible, but their bond was unbreakable. Tom spoke first, his voice steady and calm. "Good to see you, Reaper. Tell us what we're dealing with." John briefed them on the situation, detailing the bullying that led to Lily's coma and the systematic takedown of the culprits. He explained the remaining targets and the depth of the corruption they were up against. His team listened intently, their expressions growing more serious with each revelation. When John finished, David leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "What's the plan, Reaper?" John outlined his strategy for the remaining targets, emphasizing the need for precision and stealth. He knew that Haley Brooks and Victoria Cross would be heavily guarded, and that the family's desperation would make them more dangerous. Tom nodded. "We'll need to gather intel and plan our moves carefully." "No room for error." Sarah added, "I'll handle the tech. I can disable their security systems, monitor communications, and provide real-time updates." Mike grinned, "And if we need to make a statement, I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." With their roles defined, the team got to work. They began by gathering intelligence on Haley Brooks. Sarah hacked into the Brooks family's security systems, mapping out the estate and identifying weak points. Tom and David conducted surveillance, noting the movements of Haley's security detail and identifying patterns. John and Mike prepared the equipment they would need for the operation. John's experience in covert operations ensured that they had the right tools for the job, from silenced weapons to advanced surveillance gear. After several days of meticulous planning, they were ready. The team decided to strike during a high-profile charity event hosted by Haley's father. The event would be crowded, providing cover for their actions, and the chaos would serve as a distraction. On the night of the event, John and his team moved into position. Sarah monitored the security feeds, providing real-time updates on the movements of Haley and her guards. Tom took up a vantage point with his sniper rifle, ready to provide cover if needed. David infiltrated the estate, moving silently through the shadows, while Mike and John prepared to enter the main building. As the event reached its peak, Sarah signaled the team. "Haley's on the move. She's heading towards the VIP lounge." John and Mike moved swiftly, blending in with the crowd. They reached the VIP lounge just as Haley entered. John signaled to David, who disabled the security cameras in the area, creating a temporary blind spot. With the cameras down, John and Mike moved in. They approached Haley, who was caught off guard by their sudden appearance. Before she could react, Mike grabbed her, covering her mouth to prevent her from screaming. John spoke calmly but firmly, "This is for Lily." They quickly injected Haley with a fast-acting sedative, rendering her unconscious. They staged the scene to look like an overdose, knowing that the chaotic nature of the event would delay any thorough investigation. As they exited the building, Tom radioed in, "Clear exit route." No signs of disturbance. The team regrouped at the safe house, where Sarah confirmed that their actions had gone unnoticed. The news of Haley's apparent overdose spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the privileged community. The official report ruled it as a tragic accident, further heightening the paranoia among the remaining targets. Victoria Cross was now the last remaining target. The daughter of a military general, Victoria had relied heavily on her father's connections for protection. Her bullying of Lily had been both physical and psychological, and John was determined to ensure she faced justice. John and his team began gathering intelligence on Victoria. They discovered that she had been living in a heavily fortified compound, surrounded by military personnel and advanced security systems. John knew that infiltrating such a heavily guarded location would require a different approach. Sarah hacked into the compound's security systems, providing the team with detailed schematics and real-time updates on the movements of the guards. Tom and David conducted surveillance from a distance, noting the patterns and routines of the security personnel. John devised a plan to create a diversion that would draw the guards away from the compound, allowing them to infiltrate and reach Victoria. Mike prepared a series of controlled explosions that would create the necessary distraction without causing unnecessary harm. On the night of the operation, the team moved into position. Sarah monitored the security feeds, ensuring they had up-to-date information on the guards' movements. Tom took up a vantage point with his sniper rifle, ready to provide cover if needed. David infiltrated the perimeter, planting the explosives and preparing for the diversion. As the guards made their rounds, David detonated the explosives, creating a series of controlled blasts that drew the security personnel away from the main compound. The guards, believing it to be a coordinated attack, scrambled to respond, leaving the compound vulnerable. John and Mike moved swiftly, entering the compound and making their way towards Victoria's quarters. With Sarah guiding them through the security systems, they avoided detection and reached their target. Victoria was caught off guard, her sense of security shattered by the sudden intrusion. Before she could react, Mike incapacitated her, and John injected her with a fast-acting toxin that mimicked a heart attack. The execution was clean and precise, leaving no trace of foul play. They staged the scene to look like a natural death. knowing that the compound's chaos would delay any thorough investigation. As they exited the compound, Tom radioed in, "All clear." No signs of disturbance. The team regrouped at the safe house, where Sarah confirmed that their actions had gone unnoticed. The news of Victoria's sudden death spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the privileged community. The official report ruled it as a natural cause, further heightening the paranoia among the remaining targets. John knew that their mission was nearing its conclusion. The corruption that had protected these privileged youths had been exposed and dismantled. Justice was being served, and the families were facing the consequences of their actions. As the team debriefed, Tom spoke up, "What's next, Reaper?" John looked at his comrades, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for their support. "We've done what we set out to do. The network of protection is gone, and those who hurt Lily have faced justice. But there's still work to be done. We need to ensure that this kind of corruption doesn't take root again." The team nodded in agreement, ready to continue their fight for justice. They knew that their skills and experience could be used to help others, to dismantle corruption and protect the innocent. As they prepared to move forward, John reflected on the journey so far. His fight for justice had been long and arduous, but it had been worth it. The privileged elite who had tormented Lily were now living in fear, their lives disrupted by an unseen enemy. John knew that his mission was dangerous, but he was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The fight for justice was personal, and he would see it through to the end. The Reaper had returned, and he would not rest until those who had hurt his granddaughter faced the full weight of the consequences. Each strike, each calculated move, brought him closer to his goal. The fear he had sown was taking root, and justice was finally within reach. Chapter 10. Haley's Kidnapping. John, Reaper, Harris sat in the dimly lit safe house, surrounded by his old Special Forces comrades. The team had executed their missions with precision, dismantling the network of protection around the privileged youths who had tormented his granddaughter, Lily. The remaining targets, Haley Brooks and Victoria Cross, were living in constant fear. John knew it was time to focus on Haley, the daughter of a powerful media tycoon. Haley had been particularly vicious in her bullying of Lily, using her father's media empire to spread rumors and harass Lily relentlessly. John was determined to ensure she faced the consequences of her actions. He gathered his team and began planning the operation to kidnap Haley, intending to make her disappearance and subsequent death a high-profile case that would draw media attention and further destabilize the remaining targets. The first step was gathering intelligence on Haley's routine. Sarah Collins, the team's tech and communications expert, hacked into the Brooks family's security systems, mapping out their estate and identifying weak points. Tom, Ace, McAllister and David, Ghost Hunter conducted surveillance, noting the movements of Haley's security detail and identifying patterns. After several days of meticulous planning, they were ready. John decided to strike during one of Haley's regular outings, a charity event hosted by her father. The event would be crowded, providing cover for their actions, and the chaos would serve as a distraction. On the night of the event, the team moved into position. Sarah monitored the security feeds, providing real-time updates on the movements of Haley and her guards. Tom took up a vantage point with his sniper rifle, ready to provide cover if needed. David infiltrated the estate, moving silently through the shadows, while Mike, Sledge, Harris and John prepared to enter the main building. As the event reached its peak, Sarah signaled the team. "Haley's on the move. She's heading towards the VIP lounge." John and Mike moved swiftly, blending in with the crowd. They reached the VIP lounge just as Haley entered. John signaled to David, who disabled the security cameras in the area, creating a temporary blind spot. With the cameras down, John and Mike moved in. They approached Haley, who was caught off guard by their sudden appearance. Before she could react, Mike grabbed her, covering her mouth to prevent her from screaming. John spoke calmly but firmly, "This is for Lily." They quickly injected Haley with a sedative, rendering her unconscious. They then transported her to a secondary location, a secluded cabin in the woods that they had prepared in advance. The cabin was equipped with soundproofing and various security measures to ensure they wouldn't be disturbed. Over the next few days, John and his team interrogated Haley, making sure she understood the gravity of her actions and the pain she had caused. They recorded her confessions, gathering evidence that would later be used to expose the full extent of the corruption and bullying. John knew that simply eliminating Haley wouldn't be enough. He needed to send a message to the remaining targets and their families, showing them that they were not untouchable. After extracting the necessary information, John and his team executed their plan to stage Haley's death. They left her body in a location where it would be easily discovered, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. They ensured that the scene looked like a kidnapping gone wrong, with clear signs of a struggle and enough evidence to suggest foul play. When Haley's body was discovered, the media frenzy was immediate. The Brooks family, with their extensive media connections, ensured that the story dominated the headlines. The high-profile nature of the case drew significant attention, with reporters and investigators descending on the city in droves. Despite the intense scrutiny, there were no leads pointing to John or his team. Their planning had been meticulous, leaving no traces that could be traced back to them. The official investigation stalled, with authorities unable to identify the perpetrators or their motives. The news of Haley's kidnapping and subsequent death sent shockwaves through the privileged community. The remaining targets, Victoria Cross and Lucas Reed, were now living in a state of heightened paranoia. The realization that someone was targeting them and that their usual methods of protection were failing only intensified their fear. John watched the developments with a sense of grim satisfaction. Each successful strike not only eliminated a threat but also served to dismantle the sense of invincibility that had protected these privileged youths. The fear he had instilled was now complete, disrupting their lives and making them more vulnerable with each passing day. As John planned his next move, he continued to monitor the remaining targets. Victoria Cross, the daughter of a military general, had become increasingly reclusive, relying heavily on her father's connections for protection. Lucas Reed, the son of a wealthy real estate magnate, had surrounded himself with bodyguards and hired private investigators to find the person responsible. John knew that the increased security and desperation of the families posed new challenges, but he was undeterred. Each strike, each calculated move, brought him closer to his goal. He gathered his team and began planning the operation to target Victoria Cross. Victoria's compound was heavily fortified, surrounded by military personnel and advanced security systems. John knew that infiltrating such a heavily guarded location would require a different approach. Sarah hacked into the compound's security systems, providing the team with detailed schematics and real-time updates on the movements of the guards. John devised a plan to create a diversion that would draw the guards away from the compound, allowing them to infiltrate and reach Victoria. Mike prepared a series of controlled explosions that would create the necessary distraction without causing unnecessary harm. On the night of the operation, the team moved into position. Sarah monitored the security feeds, ensuring they had up-to-date information on the guards' movements. Tom took up a vantage point with his sniper rifle, ready to provide cover if needed. David infiltrated the perimeter, planting the explosives and preparing for the diversion. As the guards made their rounds, David detonated the explosives, creating a series of controlled blasts that drew the security personnel away from the main compound. The guards, believing it to be a coordinated attack, scrambled to respond, leaving the compound vulnerable. John and Mike moved swiftly, entering the compound and making their way towards Victoria's quarters. With Sarah guiding them through the security systems, they avoided detection and reached their target. Victoria was caught off guard, her sense of security shattered by the sudden intrusion. Before she could react, Mike incapacitated her, and John injected her with a fast-acting toxin that mimicked a heart attack. The execution was clean and precise, leaving no trace of foul play. They staged the scene to look like a natural death, knowing that the compound's chaos would delay any thorough investigation. As they exited the compound, Tom radioed in, "All clear." No signs of disturbance. The team regrouped at the safe house, where Sarah confirmed that their actions had gone unnoticed. The news of Victoria's sudden death spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the privileged community. The official report ruled it as a natural cause, further heightening the paranoia among the remaining targets. With Victoria's demise, John knew that his mission was nearing its conclusion. The corruption that had protected these privileged youths had been exposed and dismantled. Justice was being served, and the families were facing the consequences of their actions. As the team debriefed, Tom spoke up, "What's next, Reaper?" John looked at his comrades, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for their support. "We've done what we set out to do. The network of protection is gone, and those who hurt Lily have faced justice. But there's still work to be done. We need to ensure that this kind of corruption doesn't take root again." The team nodded in agreement, ready to continue their fight for justice. They knew that their skills and experience could be used to help others, to dismantle corruption, and to protect the innocent.